Welcome to the Practical Enneagram. Josh Lavine is an integral coach based out of New York. We met on Enneagram Prison Project's video training in 2020, and I kind of internet stalked him, as I do when I encounter people that pique my curiosity. When I found my way to his website, I discovered an amazingly clear writer. In particular, Josh has an excellent ebook on the Enneagram, which he tells me he's in the process of updating. So if you go to his website, you'll get the current version and he'll send you the new copy when it's ready. On the couple of occasions we've reconnected on Zoom, I've always learned a lot from Josh. His passion for what he does is palpable and he knows his field very well, which you'll get a sense of from this conversation. Continuing with a recent theme, the Enneagram is kind of background to what we're centrally discussing here, which is listening from a developmental perspective. I love that we got onto Josh's views on friendship as well. Who better than a conscious social type to widen our possibilities and parameters when it comes to friendship? Josh shared with me some specific listening gifts and habits that he's observed for each type at average levels. If you're interested to learn about these, I encourage you to follow Josh on Instagram, where he's teaching about type in a very clear and effective way. Enjoy this chat with Josh Lavine on listening. People listening about what you get up to in the world with the Enneagram.
Sure. I'm a coach, and I'm orienting my coaching practice to people in the startup community. So founders and investors and other coaches in the startup world, and definitely with the Enneagram lens, although more broadly kind of Enneagram and human development in general, which is a whole can of worms. But I think the Enneagram is a really powerful tool for human development, obviously. So I just started posting a lot of stuff on Instagram, very, very Enneagram related. I was really proud of the last 3 posts I posted on a sort of deep dive on each of the on each of the centers, pardon me. So as deep a dive as Instagram allows.
Yeah, that's an art form of itself, actually, to be able to convey content with depth on Instagram. You do it well.
Yeah, it's a learning process.
So might as well share with people about your type as well while we're here, Josh, and your early encounters with the Enneagram. How was that?
Well, I am social 3. So if this is important to you, social, self-pres, sexual 3, 4-wing, tri-type. We talk about tri-type here. So tri-type 396. When I first learned the Enneagram, it was over 7 years ago. And I just moved to St. Louis. It was my first position as a manager ever. I was 27 years old. I was the entertainment director of this group of musicians in St. Louis for this new piano bar. And a friend of mine said, "Hey, you might like this class on this thing called the Enneagram." And I was like, "Oh, great. Yeah, personality types that will make me a better manager." Great. In sort of classic 3 fashion. I thought of it as a self-improvement project. And I took the class. It was like a 3-day immersive weekend workshop with an organization called the Educaria Unlearning Institute in St. Louis. And it absolutely blew my freaking mind, and it changed my entire life. I mean, not to oversell it, but it was just like, it really, really, my jaw was on the floor. Like reading the book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, and reading the chapter on type 3, it was profoundly embarrassing and also uplifting at the same time. And it was like, these things that were very private that I'd never shared with anybody, that I kept very secret, like a tendency towards deception and lying and an obsession with being successful and being validated by certain people and wanting to feel admirable and all these kinds of things. It was just like, I couldn't believe the clarity and precision that it was written about in this book by people that had never met me. And I thought it was seeing into my soul. And then the class itself that I took was really well run, from the perspective of like, it created a very beautiful, safe container for me to explore that stuff in a way that I'd never done before. And so it had a really transformative effect on me. And then from there, I sort of knew that this would become my calling, this kind of helping people experience similar kinds of transformations like the one I did. It took me a little while to get there, but this is what I'm doing now. So
cool. We're going to be talking about listening, so kind of a fundamental capacity in life, particularly, I think, for learning, but also for relating, of course. So this is something of a passion of yours. Why are you so passionate about this?
Listening is, in my opinion, it's just one of the most important things that there is in the world. Listening changed my life. Being listened to in a way that was with kind of unconditional attention and love, where it was clear just in the presence of the person who was listening to me that it didn't matter what I said, he would still like me. Mm-hmm. I think this is, in a certain sense, misunderstood about threes. The stereotype of threes is that they're out there, they like being in the spotlight, they're sort of showing off all the time. But there's a whole private chamber inside most threes that they don't reveal in some cases to anybody. And that was true for me, certainly. And that private chamber contains aspects of their true selves. I was in a really, really bad space in college, and I dipped into some unhealthy level 3 stuff, stuff I'm not proud of. These kinds of things that you read about around like the level 7. And I thought I would take those secrets with me to the grave. And then in my first Enneagram class, I became very good friends with one of my classmates who was my quote unquote listening partner. We got paired up by the teacher as in listening partnerships. And actually there was an emphasis in the class, not just on the Enneagram, but on listening itself and the way that we listen to each other. And my friend Brian was just naturally gifted at this. And also we just connected at kind of like a soul brother level. And he's the first person I ever admitted any of the stuff that I had done to as a 3. And then the class itself created, as I was saying, like such a beautiful psychologically safe container that I was able to kind of reveal certain things that I had thought were very, very ugly about myself for the first time. It was a profound process and it was a painful process. And on the other side of it, I felt so much freer. And in a sense, that was the thing that changed my life. The Enneagram churned up like the awareness of all the stuff that I had not wanted to look at in myself. But then listening created the social context in which I could share it and then process it. So I want to share a couple of like general reasons, like not just personal, but like why listening is so important. So number 1, the way you listen changes the way people talk and what they're willing to share. Okay. The way you listen changes the way people talk. The quality of your presence when you're in the presence of someone, it just changes what they feel that they have available to share with you. People will not be willing to reveal their depths to you unless you create this space first. One thing I find interesting about psychological safety is that it's not useful, for example, to ask someone if they feel psychologically safe with you. Because if they don't, then what are they going to say? No, they don't feel psychologically safe with you to say it. Psychological safety becomes a kind of like felt sense comfort that floats in the air between us when the quality of our relationship has a softness or a welcomingness to it. So that's number 1. A couple other things. Listening helps the other person sense into their inner truth. So my favorite teacher on this topic is a guy named Parker Palmer.
Yeah. Before, when we've spoken, you've mentioned him. I haven't read one of his books yet, but I must.
He is so great. He's written a lot of books. He's a beautiful writer. One is called Let Your Life Speak. He explores the question, how do we listen to ourselves? How do we listen to our lives in that book? And other books he's written, one is called A Hidden Wholeness, which is about, he facilitates these things called circles of trust, which are based on a Quaker philosophy of everyone has an inner teacher. And the point of the Quaker culture is to help each person listen to their own inner teacher, which is basically the divine speaking through them. So very, very powerful practices happen in the Quaker community. For example, a thing like a clearness committee. What that is like, let's say you're struggling with something, like you're wondering what life direction you should take. So you can assemble a clearness committee, which is like 5 to 6 of your closest friends who you trust to ask only open, honest questions for the space of like 2 or 3 hours. And so you introduce a topic and then your friends are sitting around you just beaming interest and curiosity and love at you. And they're asking you questions to take you further into your own truth. So they're not yes or no questions. They're not questions that they already know the answer to. There's no agenda in the questions. There's just questions like, so when you think of the podcast, what comes up for you? And it's inviting you to sense deeper into yourself. Anyway, it's very profound. I've been at the center of one before, and it's like a really, really amazing experience. So that's that. Listening helps people sense their own truth.
Yeah.
Listening has a healing property.
Definitely.
It heals. This is what coaches and therapists go to school to learn how to do, is how to listen in such a way that other people, so that other people can heal themselves. Yeah. When I was in a community of people who like were really aware of listening and the way that we listen to each other, we all felt like we could be more of ourselves with each other than we'd ever felt in our entire lives. And there's actually like a kind of almost anger or frustration experience when I'm out in the world, that's like, why isn't that just the state of the world? Like these listening 101 skills where we can create the experience of psychological safety for someone to be themselves. The safest I've ever felt has always been in these retreat contexts or these like closed communities where there's this like deep intentional sense of this is what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And then we get sort of cast out into the world where this quality doesn't exist. And it's very annoying to me. You know, on the one hand, there's the argument, well, it's providing an opportunity for me to learn how to be more courageous and self-sharing without having the conditions be perfect.
True. Yeah.
And that is true. Mm. On the other hand, I do think that basic listening one-on-one training is really, really important for humanity. Yeah. I think it's existential to our species. And one of my favorite books on this is Healing Through the Dark Emotions by a woman named Miriam Greenspan. Fantastic book. There's just a number of beautiful quotes about listening. Let me see if I have it right here. Without a listener, the healing process is aborted.
Wow.
Human beings, like plants that bend toward the sunlight, bend towards others in an innate healing tropism. There are times when being truly listened to is more critical than being fed. Yeah. Listening well to another's pain is a primary form of nurturance, capable of healing even the most devastating of human afflictions, including the wounds and scars of violence, even the horrors of war and large-scale social trauma. Children speak their pain automatically when there's a listener, but learn to hide it when there is no ear to hear.
Gosh. We just don't, it just isn't laboured or emphasised in education at all. I share your frustrations, by the way. I think when I contacted you to talk about this topic, it was partly that I'd seen your content, your email come in of the subject. Mm-hmm. It was also partly off the back of a frustrating experience with someone that I just started dating who just couldn't listen. And it wasn't like a bad person. It's just common, isn't it, for people not to have basic listening skills. And I was thinking about, what is that? Like, what is that? It can be quite vulnerable to listen as well, Josh, right? To really receive someone and listen and embrace them with your presence it takes a lot of openness and vulnerability on your part.
Yes, I agree. And it's sort of a counterintuitive or even surprising thing to say and to really understand. What's vulnerable about listening? First of all, I do think listening is a skill.
Yeah.
It can be approached and learned like a skill. Mm-hmm. But unlike a skill, like for instance, learning how to play the piano, listening is a skill that requires your entire personhood. It doesn't require just the execution of your fingers. It's like if your pattern is, for instance, to jump in and try to solve something right away. Like if you're a really good problem solver and you think that you're helping by immediately going and solving a problem for someone, or if your assumption is when someone is sharing something with you that what they're wanting from you is to solve the problem.
Yeah.
It doesn't just take the insight, oh, they don't want me to solve the problem. They want me to just listen. Problem solving has infiltrated its way. That's actually maybe too nefarious a word. It's embedded itself as a way of being in your organism. And so there you are with a friend who's just sharing their heart with you. And if your reflex unconsciously is to problem solve, then that's your inner work, is to inhibit that response and then connect with that person with your body, heart, mind, really understand what they're saying and just be with them in a state of presence, as opposed to letting your patterns take you for a ride and then negate listening.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
So that's where the vulnerability is, I think, is in, knowing the ways in which you are habitually conditioned to respond to others, and then working with that in the presence of other people.
And also, I guess when we listen, it makes us vulnerable to being affected by what's incoming. And I think that can take a lot of courage as well when it's not your habitual way of listening. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I was just affected by your stating that. It's like letting in the energy of another person as opposed to having a kind of boundary up, letting the other person make an impression on you.
Yeah.
Being available, to be affected by that person's energy. There's an absolute vulnerability in that.
Yeah. That was quite clear. That was a passionate plea for better listening. So there's many ways to listen. So as coaches, we need to do a form of very active listening, right? That's different from the way we might listen to a friend. So we are listening. When we're coaching, we're listening for potential developmental avenues and capacities, right? Let's get a working definition of listening. So not coaching listening, but just listening. And as you know, I'd like to try and do this in Enneagram terms if it isn't too much of a creative leap. So where does listening arise from in Enneagram terms?
Yeah. Let me say one thing in response to something you just shared around the coaching versus friend style of listening. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I think I'm going to just kind of straight up disagree with you.
Yeah, do it.
You know, one of the differences between a coach and a friend is that a coaching relationship is one that a person has opted into voluntarily as I want you to help me develop. And with a friend, there isn't necessarily that like quote unquote purpose. So for a friend to approach a friendship conversation in the style of a coach might not be appropriate or wanted in that situation. Mm-hmm. That said, at the deep level, like the way that we're listening to a person, for example, things like, you know, when you're really listening as a coach or a friend or a mom or a sibling or a boss or whoever, there are different levels of like what you can be listening to. You can be listening to the words and the content a person is sharing. You can be listening to what's behind the words, the suffering behind the words, where the words are coming from. I heard a beautiful phrase, I think it was even yesterday, this idea of listening to the storyteller, not the story.
Yeah.
You know, in any sort of good coaching or therapy school, you're attuning to the person, you're helping the person, not the problem, right? Anyway, so the qualities that we're bringing to listening, I don't think are really that different when we're being really good friends or when we're being coaches. And so I am like this close to writing a book about friendship. It's definitely in the cauldron. I feel that friendship is the highest surface area frontier for human development.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
And the way that we are with our friends can either help them and us develop, or they can keep us stuck. For example, like that really transformative moment that I had with my friend Brian in that first listening, he wasn't a coach for me. He was just a friend. Yeah. Quote unquote, just a friend. But his style of listening had a very acute and profound therapeutic result for me, you know. It's just amazing to me. Like therapists and coaches have become in our culture almost like, they're like the HR department of human society. It's like, oh, you got emotional problems. You got like, you want to develop yourself, like go over there. Coach. That's who you go to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, what we learn if you study organizations, it's like, well, that doesn't work because, you know, because when you have siloed departments, it's really hard to integrate the whole system. Anyway, my point is that a friend can have a profound developmental impact on you depending on their capacity for listening and the way that they can respond to you. And they don't have to be a certified coach or a therapist to be important on your journey, or even to have the kind of result that a coach or a therapist might have.
You see friendship as a sort of untapped resource for healing and development.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's exactly how I feel. But it's probably true to say that, you know, the quality of friendship that you're able to give to someone has to do with your own level of inner work. And so, yes, friendship as an institution or as an idea. Yeah, I think about it all the time. If we really want to cultivate ourselves into a wiser culture, we want to be teaching kids early on, like how to be a good friend, you know?
I mean, I can't think of any good books I've ever read on that. Granted, it's not where my natural interests lie, probably something to do with my own instinctual constellation. That social instinct is a little bit quieter for me, but I love what you're saying, actually. And I think a good book on friendship, I think that would be amazing, Josh, and I think you should do it. I'm reminded this time last year when we connected, you were poised to write a book. Do you remember?
You know, so many ideas for books coming into my head, but I don't remember a year ago what I was thinking about. But this friendship idea has been nagging at me for a couple of years now, so it definitely has staying power. So we'll see if I end up writing it.
So do you want to address this listening in Enneagram terms question or not?
I do want to. Let's go there. Well, so first of all, I think that any type is capable of listening beautifully. So, and we can talk later if we want to about the potential pitfalls of what happens to us in our average states, depending on type specific. But I think it's more useful up front to lay the foundation. I think that listening is a social instinct kind of thing.
Yeah.
The healthy version of the social instinct is about sensing into and taking seriously the inner worlds of other people.
Yeah, so beautifully put. Yeah.
And and navigating that landscape, there's a sacredness in it, like the sacred social instinct is about that. It's like, and there's a way that when we're really present with really any of the instincts, that it opens our heart in a new way. So anyway, if we're putting it into Enneagram terms, yes, so social instinct, listening. And then in terms of the centers, I think there's a big point to make around listening. So I think listening is a 3-centered process. Well, let me say it this way. I think a lot of people, when they first learn listening, think of listening from the level of the mind. Like, I'm just going to understand your words. And a lot of people learn something like reflective listening, where what they learn is how to summarize or paraphrase, or even actually say specifically the words that you've said back to me. I say something and you reflect it back to me. That's an amazing first step. It's great. It's like, and it feels really good to the person who just shared, because it's like, wow, you were listening. You heard me, The pitfall of that, though, is that if it's not connected to your heart or like or your body, then repeating the words or just summarizing can stay at the cognitive level, and it kind of feel like it can feel like a tactic. It's like I'm doing this listening thing for you.
Yeah.
And so another layer deeper is not just understanding what the words are or reflecting the words or summarizing or paraphrasing the words, but listening at the heart level. So like, well, empathy, we've probably all heard this in the Enneagram world, but empathy means literally to suffer with. Yeah. The pathos. So suffering with. It's like moving into another person's world with them. And, speaking of what we learn in coaching and therapy school, it's like many, many years of research show it's like the single most important thing in effective therapy, regardless of the theoretical orientation or the paradigm of the therapist, is the empathic capacity of the therapist. Okay. It's like so much research shows this. Do you know the origin of the word empathy, where it comes from?
No.
It's actually a term that comes from a theory of art appreciation. Yeah. It's a theory of art appreciation that maintains that appreciating a work of art depends on the viewer's ability to basically see him or herself in the work of art.
Okay.
Anyway, I love that, because what is another person if not a work of art? So thinking of listening from the perspective of the heart, it's like really moving, like being present in the heart center, all that good 2, 3, 4 stuff, like opening your heart to be connected to the person, seeing their value, tuning into their depths, feeling the meaning behind the words. Whereas, if a person's sharing a story, why is the story important to this person? Why are they sharing this? Why now? That's moving into listening to the storyteller, not the story. Who is this person sharing the story? So that's the heart level. And then I would argue that there's one level even deeper or subtler, and that's the body level. Yeah. But it's like, okay, there's a book called Being a Brainwise Therapist, and talks about this idea of the right brain to right brain connection. So let me just geek out on this for a second. So it turns out that the body is connected to the brain more through the right hemisphere than the left hemisphere. So when we receive messages from our body, a lot of times they take the form of sort of right brain metaphorical, or sort of like holistic, vague, like hunches about things that aren't yet articulated in the left brain, linear, logical kind of language. But this beautiful book by a woman named Bonnie Badenoch, Being a Brainwise Therapist, talks a lot about the right brain to right brain, or body to body connection with therapist and client. So it's like, there you are in the room with a person, and a quality settles in, where it's like we are flowing with each other. Actually, you don't even have to be in the same room with a person. Like, I've experienced this on Zoom calls with clients or with friends, where it's like, there's a way that when you're really attuned with someone, it's almost like your energies are just now commingling in a way. It's not two sort of billiards balls bouncing in space. You're like, but you're not also merged with each other in a kind of nihilist diffusion. It's like you're 2 eyes in a we space. 2 eyes don't necessarily make a we, right? But then when you enter that we space, you experience that at the level of the body. This may sound abstract, and in a sense is when you put it in language, but in a felt sense way, it's very real. When you're really with a person in a we space. Yeah. And a lot of that information comes through the body too. Like, you have the words and the cerebral understanding that is coming from your mind. You have this like the sense of heart connection that is coming from your heart. And then there are hunches that come from your body. It's like if I'm in a session with a client or even just with a friend and I catch, and this is also social instinct stuff, but it's like I just catch a slight glance from them or a set of their shoulders or something, and it's making me feel a certain way. And I'm like, I don't know. I use the phrase a lot. I'm going to throw a dart at a board. That's good. But it feels like something is happening here. Like X. How are you experiencing that? Anyway, so that comes from the body, I think.
Yeah, and also I'm hearing here a lot of your strengths as a 3 probably are feeding into this as well. Well, this capacity to know what's going on with another person. Do you not see this has been a lifelong strength for you?
I'm just taking that in right now. Yeah, I think.
When you think about what the patterns are or the MO of orienting from 3 is, in order to be able to adapt to be seen as valuable in the eyes of another, we have to have a good intuition for what the other values, right?
Totally. Yeah, and the social 3 has that kind of double whammy of that. I totally see that. Yeah. That said, I also know, I guess this has been a sort of truth of mine, like this almost over attunement in that way for my life, which has its gifts and liabilities. But I also just want to make the point that it's, if you're not a social 3, doesn't mean that this isn't available to you, like I know, for example, really anytime the type that came to mind was 8s. Like 8s are so good at just like that body sense of what's going on with another person that like really any type has this, I think, in their own style.
Can studying and working with the Enneagram help us to listen, and why? If it can, why? Yes,
but it depends on how you're learning the Enneagram.
Yeah. Can you say more?
So I know a lot of people who've done self-study with the Enneagram and read a bunch of books, and the Enneagram exists for them as an abstract cerebral framework. And it's provided them a lot of insights, but it hasn't really touched them. So to become a good listener, you have to go through a transformation of personhood. So if you're using the Enneagram, in my opinion, correctly, it's you're using it for the kind of deep inner work that transforms you to have more capacity for presence and empathy and all these kinds of things that, yes, make you a better listener. Being able to contain your own reactivity and be present with another person. But if you're not learning the Enneagram in that way, then
it's not going to make a bit of difference.
Yeah.
Let's park our conversation with a practice or more than one practice, if you like, generic practice for improving our listening.
Practice for listening. This is going to be boring, but I'll give you a couple actually. So meditation, I think, is one of the most important practices, one of the most universally powerful practices in general, but it's really, really good at helping you contain or settle your own reactivity in the presence of whatever's arising, and to let another person's energy make an impression on you without it stirring up your own triggers. So that's basically any practice for your own self-regulation is really important to become a good listener.
Yeah.
That's I would say like primary first step is like when you're becoming a good listener, working with your own reactivity so that whatever a person is sharing, you can stay with yourself and with the other person without getting subsumed inside whatever tornado may or may not be arising in you. So meditation is good. A couple other just tips: to follow the storyteller, not the story thing as an idea, responding to the person, not the content. Let's see. Here's something interesting you could try. This is really useful with kids. What's it like to just be in the presence of someone else, kind of holding their eye contact and letting yourself like fall into them without losing yourself? Say this idea of two eyes don't make a we. So there you are with another person entering we space. So what's it like to consciously declare in your own head that you are now entering a we space? You're going to be in a relational container with another person. So like whatever that means for you, like just making the choice consciously to be with the person in this moment. I find that to be a powerful practice.
Thank you so much.
This has been really fun. Yeah. Thanks for chatting about this.
The next chat is with Cece Licko-Backman. Cece has written an incredible book called Aspects of You. We're going to be talking about her teaching on the centres of intelligence from that book.